Do not close a construction loan on a construction idea. That is where a lot of residential construction problems begin. Not the first draw, not when the builder submits the first invoice, not when the borrower starts panicking halfway through the project. The problem usually starts earlier. It starts when a construction loan closes before the project is actually ready to be built. Welcome to AES Construction Intelligence. Today, we're going to talk about one of the most important concepts in residential construction lending: the difference between a construction idea and an actionable construction project, because those are not the same thing. And if you confuse the two, you can create a mess before anybody ever swings a hammer. A construction idea can sound pretty real. Somebody wants to build a house, they've talked to a builder, maybe they have some plans, maybe they have a rough budget, maybe they have a lender involved. Everybody is excited. The borrower is picking finishes, the builder is talking schedule, the lender is trying to move the file forward, and on the surface, it feels like a project. But feeling like a project is not the same thing as being ready to close a construction loan. That distinction matters a lot. A construction loan is not just money attached to a dream. It's a financial structure tied to a physical construction process. That means the project has to be clear enough to fund, clear enough to verify, clear enough to sequence, and clear enough for the lender to understand what they are actually financing. If that clarity is not there before closing, the loan does not fix the problem. It locks the problem into the file. And then everybody gets to act surprised later. Here's the issue. Once a construction loan closes, the psychology changes immediately. The borrower believes the project is ready. The builder believes the funding is committed. The lender now has exposure. And everybody mentally moves from planning to building, even if the file is not properly structured. That's where the danger lives, because once that closing happens, the pressure changes. Now, incomplete plans become a real problem. Budget gaps become a real problem. Permit delays become a real problem. Contractor issues become a real problem. Draw schedule problems become a real problem. Before closing, those are planning issues. After closing, they become funding problems. And funding problems are louder. An actionable construction project is different. It has defined plans. Not we're still tweaking a few things. Not we'll figure it out later. Defined plans. It has a budget that actually matches those plans. Not a budget that makes everybody feel comfortable at closing. A real budget tied to the actual scope of work. It has a qualified contractor, licensed, insured, executed contract, clear scope of work. Some evidence that the person responsible for the project can actually manage the work. An actionable construction project also has a funding strategy. How are funds going to move? When are they going to move? What documentation is required? How will progress be verified? What happens if the project runs over budget? What happens if the borrower changes the scope? What happens if the builder submits a draw request that does not match the work completed? These are not minor details. This is the structure of the loan. And then there is the permit. The permit matters. I know everybody wants to close. I know everybody wants to move. And I also know delays are frustrating and costly. But the permit is the municipality saying this project has been reviewed. This work is authorized to begin. That's not a small thing. If the loan closes before the permit is issued, somebody needs to understand exactly what risk is being accepted. If a permit review changes the scope, the cost, the engineering, or the timeline, that's not a paperwork issue anymore. That is a project structure issue. And now the loan is already closed. Congratulations! You've officially made the problem harder. This is why I keep using the phrase actionable construction project, because it forces the right questions. Not does the borrower want to build? Not does the builder want the job? Not can we get this loan closed by Friday? The question is this project actually ready to be built? And more importantly, is this project structured well enough to justify closing the construction loan? That is the question. Most people underestimate how much happens after closing. They think closing is the finish line. It's not. In construction lending, closing is the starting line. That is when the real work begins. That is when invoices start showing up. That's when draw requests start getting submitted. That's when site conditions become real. That is when change orders appear. And that is when the borrower realizes the allowance number was not magic. That is when the lender starts asking why the project is already sideways. And if the project was not actionable before closing, every one of those issues becomes harder to manage after closing. The goal is not simply to close the loan. That is where a lot of people get confused. The goal is to complete the project. Get from dirt to structure to certificate of occupancy to finished house, without turning the entire process into a hostage negotiation between the borrower, the builder, and the lender. That requires structure. It requires sequencing. It requires documentation. It requires reality. Not vibes, not optimism, not we've done a bunch of these things. Reality. At AES, this is the foundation of how we look at residential construction lending. Before a loan closes, the project should be actionable. That means the lender is not just financing an idea. They are financing a structured construction project with defined information, with a clear funding path, with a contractor who can be evaluated, with documentation that can be reviewed, with a process that can be followed. So here's the warning. Do not close a construction loan on a construction idea. Close it on an actionable construction project. Because if the project is not structured before closing, it will have to be managed after closing. And by then, the pressure is higher. The options are fewer, and everybody is already emotionally committed. That is not risk management. That is cleanup. And cleanup is always more expensive. This is AES Construction Intelligence. I'll see you next time.